it was very painful trying to get people to understand this because of the mindset that prevails out there today. There's more financial noise out there in the world today than ever before. There are more financial geniuses per square foot in the world than all the time.
You talk about leverage in that chapter, and you say that rarely is there conversation about leverage when the lever goes the opposite way.
Yeah, they say that leverage is wonderful. Yeah, it is, so long as things are working the way the financial geniuses describe it. But I've never met one that ever tells you what happens when the lever goes the other way. After all, that is what a lever is all about. But one other thing that you mentioned there earlier, I was dealing with partnerships in real estate, and particularly in real estate development, where I really got involved in real estate. I felt comfortable having partners, among other things. Jason, if you don't have somebody to share things with, you really don't have much.
Right.
So there was this big name lawyer here in Birmingham, a principal of one of the largest firms in Alabama. He owned 30% of our project. We had a project that there's no way you could lose. It was impossible. He bankrupted on us. My share of bailing him out was $300,000. So actually, there was $800,000 at 23% that I was really attacking to get rid of all that debt through this means.
How did that make you feel?
Painful.
Now, for someone who's watching, Nelson, knowing that, and we've talked many times where we know that for people, the things that they don't know, maybe primarily the history that they haven't read about yet.
Yep.
Hence why we're taking you back to this period of time.
Yep.
What would life have been like for you financially, having been faced with that situation, if you had already been practicing this process and had the cash values accessible to essentially help you through this without having to rely upon the commercial banking system?
Well, it was very painful, of course, to face up to all this sort of stuff. But when I started teaching what I discovered, I tripled my income, and that helped out a good deal. But it was very painful trying to get people to understand this because of the mindset that prevails out there today. There's more financial noise out there in the world today than ever before. There are more financial geniuses per square foot in the world than all the time before that.
You know what we see, Nelson, we experience with folks who embrace this process and they begin to implement it in their lives, they get very excited and they want to share what they're doing with others. And you've taught us that everything begins with the way that we think.
Sure.
And you've also taught us that this is not a process where we can try to convince someone through intellectual argument versus helping somebody understand what the essence of this process is. Could you maybe expand on your thoughts around how people come to know about becoming your own banker and what your suggestions would be about what a person can do to gain that knowledge and to catch it, if you will?
Overcoming a mindset is the biggest problem. And the common denominator out there that's created all this is our educational system. It's backward. In essence, it's an effort to inject knowledge into people's heads and so forth. But no, this is not taught, this is caught. There's got to be desire. You can have all the technical knowledge you can imagine, but without desire, nothing happens at all. I've seen that so much out there, and you're wasting your time when you try to get people to get motivated to do this sort of thing. Only they can motivate themselves, that's all.
Going back to leverage for a moment, I've heard Warren Buffett say that regarding leverage, smart people don't use it and stupid people shouldn't.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Good one. Can't do any better than that. But that's the way the world operates. See, that's what just surrounds us out there in the news media and such. So as a result of that, I haven't watched news media in 14 months. I refuse to do it. It's nonsense, yeah.
The story where you took us back to that period of time where inflation had skyrocketed, you had an $800,000 problem that needed to be solved.
Right.
And we recognized from what you wrote in the book that nobody from the life insurance industry sat down with you and said, Nelson, we have the vehicle that will enable you to implement a process to get yourself out of this situation, where in fact, when it came to you and you began to implement this process, what you essentially did is you took the financial energy away from the central banking system and you redirected that energy into your own system How long did it take you to solve that problem?
Oh, to get the banks totally out of my life took 13 years.
And fast forward to today, how long has it been since your wife, Mary, and you have seen a conventional bank?
Since I developed this concept and so forth and got rid of the banks and the indebtedness I owed them, Mary and I and Kim and Dave and their family, we haven't seen a bank in over 30 years. Everything is done within the family. There's no mortgages, no car notes, there's no more financing of any kind. And that is a very peaceful, stress-free way of life.
You've also said that, and I think your example ties to this perfectly, that it requires an understanding and a discipline to implement. What did you mean by that?
Well, again, it's overcoming that nonsense that prevails out there. That is the biggest problem because everywhere you go, people have got this mindset that has been pounded into their heads by advertising and by the educational organizations and so forth, that this is the way you do things. You see, when I put all this together, it made sense to me that I should bring this to the attention of home office of a major insurance company that I was working with at that time. And I spent 5 years trying to teach them this concept that your need for finance is greater than your need for protection. And I can't find anybody out there that has ever brought this understanding to light and to this degree. Everybody knew that you could get policy loans and so forth, but they were all fairly minuscule and stuff like that. It was all expressed in terms of emergency circumstances or incidental things. But as far as a way of life, never. Well, they were totally unteachable. I gave up. I said, this is waste effort. And then it occurred to me that I should learn this in academia, particularly in forestry school, because the wood products industry is just eaten up with OPM, other people's money. A $50 million addition to a paper mill is nothing. To produce a product you blow your nose on and throw it in the trash can. I said, now think, boy, the dean of the forestry school at the University of Georgia at that time, you were in the first class he taught back in 1949. Call him. You get an interview based on that relationship. Get in your airplane, go over and spend the day with him. Run this by him. If he rises to the occasion, then let's establish a chair. They would do nothing but teach this. And then I was prepared to find the money to fund the chair. But all he was interested in, how much are you going to give the Alumni Society this year because I'm retiring next year? Nevertheless, I pursued that possibility for 2 years. Finally found out that if I give them $250,000, they let me teach this. They should have been giving me $250,000 to teach this. Now, what I learned out of that is that mental paralysis regarding financial stuff in home offices of corporations is legendary. But in academia, it is worse. But yet they're the ones who are out there teaching the nonsense. To make matters worse, there's huge amounts of money spent on learning how to do things wrong. That's the worst of all.
You've shared with us that the process that you pioneered, that you developed and founded, is not to be sensationalized. And in fact, it's ridiculously simple.
Yes. And it's not a get-rich-quick scheme at all. To the contrary, it's something that's always growing. This is where my forestry background helps out a little bit. Consider the way a tree grows. It is always growing until one or two things happens. It dies or harvested, one or the other. But it's always getting better. Well, that's the way life insurance policy is. It's always getting better. It cannot go backward. But here comes along the new programs by the Harvard MBAs. I found out in my studies last night that one of my favorite people is Maynard Keynes, who's just screwed up the entire world, that he was involved in life insurance in England. And he destroyed a company back there with the same kind of thinking that prevails out there today. I didn't know that. And so it was an interesting evening last night.
I think that one of the most important questions in part one of becoming your own banker to ask yourself is, how much of the banking function do you control as it relates to your needs?
Yeah, it should be 100%. It can be. There are lots of folks out there that are in this condition. They'll never see a bank again in their life.
And so this book essentially is all about how to create your own banking system so that you can control 100% of the function as it relates to your needs.
Yeah.
But you've shared with us many times that it doesn't happen overnight.
Oh, no. Oh, no. And there are lots of people out there that will never catch on. There are people with degrees that they have no desire in this direction at all. And you cannot force feed them it at all. It's impossible. They gotta wanna.
There has to be a motivation there.
Yes.
And a desire.
In essence, infinite banking concept is ridiculously simple, but it's complicated by the fact of the mindset that the general public has. They think that can't be true because it's so simple, that it's got to be complicated of some kind. The forces out there that cause all this sort of stuff deliberately make it that way. They intimidate you is what it amounts to. Well, you got to realize what evil looks like, and that is evil that's going on out there. Don't participate, that's all. You got to learn to secede from the way that the world thinks, is what this amounts to. And when you do, you've created a microcosm that's all yours. You've created an aquarium.
Hence why it's important, as you've said, to have a good coach.
That's absolute necessity, because people listen to what the world has to say so very much. For instance, there's a radiologist up in Coleman, Alabama, about 45 miles north of here, who was coming along very well with what I was teaching back when I first put this together. He was among the very first that I introduced this concept to. But every time that I went to a review with him, his first question, who else is doing this? I can't find anybody out there that corroborates what you're teaching. Am I the Lone Ranger? Well, I said, well, what if you are? You're doing it right, they're doing it wrong, you ought to be proud. Well, he stuck with it, and by the time he retired, he had more than doubled his usual premiums. And now he sings my praises, was try to keep him between the ditches of listening to the nonsense that's going on.